What you are about to listen to is an episode from my dear friend Blake Cohn's podcast, his new show called Third Rail Judaism. Blake's idea behind this show is to go to the places that everyone's scared to touch, to go to the third rails of our religion and our history, and to just talk about these issues that may be quite explosive and controversial. And I was privileged and honored to serve as the first guest. And I'm going to share it here on my show. I have permission from Blake to do that. But I hope you enjoy this show. It was fun to record it, and I hope you will find it interesting and illuminating. And as always, my email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.
Howdy, I'm Blake Cohn, and this is Third Rail Judaism, where we explore the most controversial and misunderstood aspects of Judaism, Torah, Jewish history, Jewish law, and Jewish thought. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to the podcast and thank you for listening. This is our first episode, and I'm very excited about it. This episode is also the first in a series I call Difficult Bible Stories. There are a number of stories in the Hebrew Bible that are upsetting and really go against the grain of our modern sensibilities. Reading them can be unsettling, and you might ask yourself why they were included in the Torah and what lessons we are supposed to take from them. Today's episode centers on one such story, the story of Dina in Genesis in the Parsha Vayishlach, and he went, in which Dina, daughter of Jacob and Leah, is kidnapped and raped. Her brothers then use deception and violence in order to rescue her. I'd like to tell you why I've chosen this story as my starting point. Back in 2020, I listened to the debut episode of another podcast called People I Mostly Admire, hosted by the economist Steve Levitt, co-author of the best-selling book Freakonomics. His guest was Steven Pinker, who is a Canadian-American cognitive psychologist, psycholinguist, and public intellectual, well known for his book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, which argues that human society has become progressively less violent over time. During their conversation, Pinker revisits several Bible stories, including Dina's, to illustrate what he sees as the extreme violence of past generations. Listen for yourselves. Steve Levitt begins.
So let's change gears. One thing I hadn't expected from you reading your books was how funny you can be when you turn your attention to being funny. And I think a great example comes from another one of your books called The Better Angels of Our Nature, which argues that violence has greatly decreased over time. And that doesn't strike me as being a very funny topic. But your synopsis of the Old Testament in that book made me laugh so hard that I could barely breathe.
Yeah, not everyone found that passage so funny. But yeah, so what I simply did is I went through the major stories of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and just described them pretty factually. I had intended this as a kind of a sanity check because I'm making the argument that violence has declined over the course of history. I just want to remind people of how violent earlier times were, and the Hebrew Bible is a fine example. So I told the story of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, pretty much sticking to the King James translation. Cain talked with Abel, his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field, and Cain rose up against Abel and slew him. With a world population of exactly 4, that works out to a homicide rate of 25%, which is about 1,000 times higher than the equivalent rates in Western countries today. I then talked about the first of many genocides in the Bible, the Noachian flood, the binding of Isaac, the selling of Dina, Jacob's daughter, in marriage.
Can you tell the Dina story? I love the Dina story.
Yes, Isaac's son Jacob has a daughter, Dina. Dina is kidnapped and raped, apparently a customary form of courtship at the time, since the rapist's family then offers to purchase her from her own family as a wife for the rapist. Dina's brothers explain that an important moral principle stands in the way of this transaction. The rapist is uncircumcised. So they make a counteroffer. If all the men in the rapist's hometown cut off their foreskins, Dina will be theirs. While the men are incapacitated with bleeding penises, the brothers invade the city, plunder and destroy it, massacre the men, and carry off the women and children. When Jacob worries that neighboring tribes may attack them in revenge, his sons explain that it was worth the risk. Should our sister be treated like a whore? Soon afterward, they reiterate their commitment to family values by selling their brother Joseph into slavery. I mean, funny or not funny? And I grew up with the idea that historically the Hebrew Bible was what first introduced morality to the world. When I read some of the passages as an adult, it's horrifying. And that's what's in the Old Testament. It made me realize that for all of the pageantry, the community, the beauty of religious observance, it's a big mistake to think of the Bible as the source of our moral values.
It's really interesting. I had never read the Bible. I was raised completely non-religiously until maybe 3 months ago, the first time I ever opened up the Old Testament. And I was shocked. I mean, I didn't see it even as clearly as you lay it out here, but it was really surprising to me, the role of vengeance and how often humans fail. It was really surprising, and it jibes so well with what you just described as your interpretation and your caveats.
Yes, I mean, the God of the Old Testament basically works by the moral code of the Corleones. You do something that insults me, and I'll murder you and your family. Blood revenge was the highest moral value. Now, I mean, this is not to cast aspersions on Jews and Christians today. Quite the opposite. The point is that we have progressed, but we view it, fortunately, through modern eyes. There's a kind of benign hypocrisy where we say we believe it, but thank goodness we don't.
Well, there's a lot going on there. When I first heard this in 2020, I was really upset by this. Of course, I knew that many people held this view of Torah, but hearing Levitt and Pinker, two figures known for deep analysis and the ability to see beyond surface-level assumptions, treat the text in such a superficial way surprised me. While Levitt admits almost no religious training or experience, and Pinker acknowledges some, it seems unlikely that they're completely unaware of the depth and interpretive nuance that Jewish tradition brings to these texts. Yet they approach this story in a way that I suspect would horrify them if someone examined their fields, economics or linguistics, in such a perfunctory and slipshod manner. Pinker claims that he is describing the stories of the Old Testament pretty factually, but he makes many assumptions and assertions. For instance, he claims kidnapping and raping a young woman must have been a customary form of courtship. Was that in fact the case? He also implies that the brothers killed the Hivites because they felt insulted. But was that their motivation? Perhaps most troubling, he claims that the God of the Old Testament basically works by the moral code of the Corleones. Blood revenge was the highest moral value. But even if blood revenge was Shimon and Levi's motivation, why does he assume that God approves of their actions? Furthermore, Pinker claims that it's a big mistake to think of the Bible as the source of our moral values, and that there's a kind of benign hypocrisy where we say we believe it, but thank goodness we don't. Of course, that hinges on whether Pinker's assessment of Torah's message is correct. He may be correct that violence has declined over the millennia since the Torah was written, but perhaps that is precisely because we have internalized the Torah's lessons on justice, equality under the law, the sanctity of the individual, and the idea that every human being is created in God's image. Could that be what's led to our modern rejection of violence, or at least our shared revulsion and condemnation when it does occur? But fear not, because to help us sort through these problems, I'm thrilled to welcome my friend, Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe. Rabbi Wolbe studied at the Yad Aharon Institute for Advanced Talmudic Scholarship, the Mir Yeshiva, and the Advanced Kollel for Elite Talmudic Scholars at Eish HaTorah. He is currently the Director of Global Outreach at Torch, the Torah Outreach Center in Houston, Texas. Rabbi Wolbe, first let me say that I am incredibly honored to have you as the first guest on Third Rail Judaism. Not least of all because you are my first and most important Jewish podcaster influence. I think I began listening to you around 2017 when I found the Jewish History podcast, which is, of course, the gateway drug to the entire Wolbe podcast universe. You have podcasts on Parsha, ethics, Jewish life, Torah 101. You are certainly one of the greatest Jewish podcasters in the world, but I would put all my money on you being the most prolific.
Well, I appreciate that. Wow. And I like that shout out. Yad Aron. That's a long time ago.
Yeah,
I guess it's still on my bio on my website.
that's right. That's right. We
I
rolled
did
deep
that.
here.
One of my colleagues sent me a message from one of my listeners that I have to update my bio, the bio of my wife on the Torch website, because it says that we have 5 children, but she believes it's actually 6. I don't tell her that it's a couple more than that.
Right.
It's going to keep your bio updated every once in a while.
You can tell the last time you updated it by how many children it says you have.
That's right.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining me. And I'd like to jump right in it by saying that I can understand and I can remember, maybe not the first time I read the story of Dina, but certainly I can remember my early impressions of it. And it really is troubling, and it can even be an embarrassing thing to read. This and other stories in the Torah, I just in last week's Parsha, even, reading about, okay, so you have a slave and they want to stay, so you take them over to the doorpost and bore a hole in their ear. These things can be very bizarre to contemporary audiences and very troubling. And this story is such a story. It seems like an unfair and unfortunate episode, to take something that is supposed to be holy, like circumcision, and to use it in this way, which seems kind of cynical and unethical. Of course, there are deeper layers here. Can you relate to that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's very legitimate to ask these questions. And I wouldn't call it embarrassing episodes. We're not embarrassed about anything in the Torah. Not a single drop of ink, not a jot or a tittle of the Torah makes us embarrassed. However, it's in the Torah, and thus it must be instructive for us. And I think maybe a prerequisite for this conversation, I believe that every single letter in the Torah is authored not by Moshe, but by God Almighty. That's the traditional belief that we've had ever since the Sinai revelation, ever since Moshe, 3,300 years ago. That's important to note. So if this conversation is going to happen, we have to assume that this is actually divine, and literally every word, every letter, it's measured, it's perfect, it's pristine, and there's nothing extra, and it's all supposed to be valuable and instructive for us. That little citation from that podcast that you mentioned, I thought they were maybe reading it very superficially. I don't believe that either one of those authors ever considered the fact that it is divine. Literally every word, every letter is from God Almighty. They had a little bit of a irreverent and cavalier attitude towards the stories of the Torah. So yes, there are questions that we have, and there are things that jump off the page as being odd or strange or bizarre, like the boring of the hole, and certainly this story that we're going to talk about today. And that's legitimate. And that's why we have so much commentary trying to understand it. Well, let's understand it and let's see what the lessons are for us, because to read it just superficially and to just read it as if we're assuming it's authored by a human, then we're not even talking on the same page. We don't have the same presuppositions going into the discussion.
Well, thank you for saying that. And for today's discussion, and probably further episodes, we will make that assumption that this is a divine work and that God wrote the Torah and Moshe was just a scrivener, if you will. We will certainly have an episode focusing exactly on that in the future. But even with Steven Pinker not necessarily making that assumption, he still makes assumptions about God's perspective on this story. Maybe as a starting point, we can start from a generality and move to more specific, but let me ask you, do we read this as prescriptive rather than descriptive, or vice versa? Meaning, if you read a story in the Torah, how do you distinguish between a story in which God, the author of the Torah, is telling you this is how you should behave, or one that is just describing an event that happened?
Well, if it's in the Torah, it must have some lesson for us. That's an accepted principle that we're never told comprehensive histories or stories or narratives of even the greatest of personalities. Moshe, we don't know what happened to him from from being a teenager until he was the age of 80. Like that whole part is completely omitted in the Torah. Abraham, one of the most significant personalities in the Torah, is introduced at the age of 75. We don't know what happened to him as a youth, and there are lots of gaps in his storyline, and that's okay. Why? Because the Torah is going to give us only the things that are instructive. In fact, the word Torah means instruction. So the stories, I believe that this story happened. I have no problem with the way that the story is described in the actual scripture. And we're not saying it's some sort of metaphor of sorts. Not that argument would be illegitimate, because we know the Torah has to be instructive. It does not necessarily have to be literal. It's literally the word of God, but the events as they're told are told because of their instructive capacity. But let's take the assumption this happened as described. And I will note, by the way, I only listened to this citation from the podcast a few minutes ago, but there was something that they said that was just completely in violation of the actual text. Like they said that Ham raped Dina, as they called her, and then he wanted to marry her, and that's some sort of customary form of courtship, something like that. He said. I'm looking at chapter 34 of Genesis, and I'll read you from the Stone edition, just so you know that this is the edition that I'm using, not the King James edition, but this is the translation. And in verse 7, they say it's an outrage. An outrage was committed in Israel. By lying with the daughter of Israel, such a thing may not be done. This was not something that was customary. This was a departure from the ordinary behavior of the time. This was an outrage. So let's take the perspective that this is the story as it's told in the Torah. This is what happened, but let's at least follow the text and not deviate from it, not making assumptions, especially assumptions that are completely contradicted by the actual text in front of us.
That's a great point. And, Steven Pinker's thesis is essentially that violence has decreased over time. And so he is making the assumption that the kidnapping and rape of Dina was an accepted practice based on the response of the brothers. But of course, as you just pointed out, I'm reading the Koren edition, and it says such a thing cannot be done. So, yeah, obviously this behavior was outside the norm.
Yes. And I will tell you that in the commentary of Rashi, he references an event that happened earlier in the Torah that was briefly mentioned by those two podcasters or by those two personalities in the podcast, and that's the flood of Noah.
Yeah.
In the run-up to the flood of Noah, there was a moral depravity, and there was wanton, illicit licentiousness in the world. The men just grabbed whatever woman they could, and that highlights the moral depravity that was present and that was prevalent before the flood. And the flood is justified by being, all flesh has become corrupted. Now, what happened after the flood? After the flood, there was a correction. There was a kind of a mass repentance of sorts. So what Rashi says here, that the reason why this is not done is because this is behavior that resembles the pre-flood era. Antediluvian, as it's called. The antediluvian era. And this is behavior where the master of the city, the mayor's son, head honcho, a prince, comes and grabs whoever he wants. That's behavior that was not accepted, was not tolerated at the time. It was, from an earlier era, thankfully a bygone era. So this was a departure from the normal course of behavior, which I think does help recast it for the events that ensued. This was not normal, it was not accepted, and it was not prevalent at that time.
Yeah. Steven Pinker also frames the flood as a genocide, as the first of many, I think he says. And that's interesting because, that would be a genocide perpetrated by Hashem himself. But I think that you could frame Simeon and Levi's actions as a genocide of sorts. They kill all the males of the Hivites.
All the adult males of the city, yes.
All the adult males. So, there's a lot to pick apart with the Dina story, but I do want to focus on Simeon and Levi's actions and what we are supposed to learn from their actions, what God's perspective is, what Jacob's perspective is on this, and the methodology of determining what that is. So why do we know, or how do we know that Pinker's attitude or perspective on this is not the attitude or perspective that we should have and not the one that we are being instructed to have by the Torah.
Well, my general, again, I don't know much about Pinker and his philosophy and his book, but if the general thesis is that there's been a reduction of violence over time, to me, I find that hard to accept, given that literally the worst genocide in all of human history happened, 80 years ago? And, how many people have been wantonly killed over the last 100 years? How many did the Soviets kill, and communist China, and all sorts of other atrocities that have happened in very recent times? So maybe that's not quite on the 2020s. Now, it's a more peaceful time, relatively speaking, but certainly I find it quite dubious to say that there's just been this, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but there's been this linear decline in violence since antiquity. Is that really true? Now, does he address that in his books? I don't even know.
I believe he does, and I didn't focus on this aspect of his argument, but if I recall, he does show that violence has declined over time, notwithstanding World War II, World War I, and a few briefer periods of heightened violence, in more modern times. But even with that, even if you just look at violent episodes of the 2020s, with October 7th being an obvious one, and other acts of genocide or of genocidal intent in Africa and other places that are even going on right now, I'd like to believe him, certainly, which leads to another point, which that he refutes in his statements there, which is that, is the Torah the basis of our morality? Has a Torah view of the sanctity of life penetrated the hearts and minds of people around the globe?
But that's not what he said. He's not talking about how effective was the Torah in changing people's attitude. He's saying the Torah should not be used as a source of morality.
Right.
But certainly I would say my position would be that humanity is capable of outrageous violence and outrageous, unthinkable evil. But we have Almighty God's Torah, guidance from heaven that will ground us and moor us to morality. So I'm going to hit the exact opposite side. I'm going to say that, yes, there has been a reduction of violence over the course of time, insofar as humanity has adopted the values of the Torah, the values of Almighty God.
Okay, so
I'm happy to go through the story and see where the questions lie.
Let's do that.
So you want to tell the story?
Sure. I think our listeners have heard it in the intro, or at least heard Pinker's version of it. Should we go through it line by line here in the
Sure. Let's go grab onto and hug that third rail. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Dina, the daughter whom Leah had borne to Yaakov, went out to see the daughters of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the land, saw her, he took hold of her, lay with her, and violated her. He became deeply drawn to Dina, Yaakov's daughter, and, in love with the young woman, he spoke to her heart. Shall we stop there and see?
Yes, he commits an unconscionable crime. He takes this innocent girl and he sleeps with her and he violates her, which is quite dastardly. Now, I will note that there's no word extra in the Torah. So when it says that he slept with her and then he violated her, those are two separate things. So this is not only abducting her, assaulting her, and violating her and shattering her innocence, but according to our understanding of this, he also sodomized her, which is, again, very, very inappropriate, dastardly behavior and intolerable crime. Now, how old was Dina at the time? Do we know?
I don't know.
So we could do some math to figure out how old she was. Because previously in the story, we have the list of the children of Jacob, 11 sons and 1 daughter born to him. And we have some timestamps. So Dina was born right before Joseph was born. And Joseph was born about 7.5 years before the events described in this story. Why? Because Joseph was born after 14 years of working for Laban. And then he stayed for another 6 years. So when he left Laban, it was 6 years after Joseph was born. And He's been traveling now for a year and a half. So Joseph was 7.5 at the time. And Dina was a little bit older. According to the calculation, she was 8 years old and 1 month. 8 years, 1 month old. So she's young. She's a child. This is a terrible, terrible crime. We have to appreciate that. This is an unconscionable, intolerable crime. I think a way of introducing the Torah's perspective and the behavior of Shimon Levi is that this crime cannot go unpunished. It cannot be accepted. We don't believe, the Torah does not believe, God does not believe that crime should be tolerated, and certainly not crime of this magnitude.
Notwithstanding her youth or the fact that she was violated, would her youth have been against the grain of the cultural norms of the time in terms of marrying somebody or having sexual relations with a female generally?
We don't know exactly. We know that even 200 years ago, it was very common for young teenagers to get married. Today, what the average American gets married at the age of 30, something like that. 50 years ago was much younger, and certainly 100 years ago, 150 years ago was much younger. So it's hard to know exactly what was normal at the time. But certainly we're not talking about a fully developed, maybe, but if so, it's a very young person by any standard.
Yeah.
So it's possible that she would have been old enough to get married at the time, but certainly his behavior, when you understand what he did and to whom he did it, and the fact this was not acceptable by any standard of morality at the time, and certainly not by our standard, it's important to keep that in mind to understand the events that ensued.
All right, shall I continue?
Let's go.
Shechem said to his father Hamor, "Take this girl as a wife for me." When Yaakov heard that he had defiled his daughter Dina, his sons were in the field with livestock. And so he stayed silent until they came home. Anything in there we should note?
Well, it's important to note that Jacob is not reacting rashly to this. And that's one of the qualities we see with Jacob. He doesn't behave rashly to basically anything. He's unflappable. But he's going to outsource some of the reaction or the appropriate behavior to his sons, which is noteworthy. I think it is noteworthy.
Shechem's father Hamor came to Yaakov to speak with him. Meanwhile, Yaakov's sons, having heard what had happened, came back from the field. They were shocked and furious, for Shechem had committed an outrage in Israel by sleeping with Yaakov's daughter. Such a thing cannot be done. But Hamor spoke with them and said, "My son Shechem has his heart set upon your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife. Intermarry with us. Give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. Settle with us. The land is open to you. Live here, trade here, acquire property here."
This is a very nice offer, right? Maybe we could just forget about the troubles of the past and forget about the crime that was done and move past it and just forgive and forget, and we'll develop economic ties. We'll do trade. And that may have been reasonable in his eyes, but it's not reasonable at all in the eyes of Jacob and his sons, which is important to note because one of the questions we have to ask is, okay, well, what about the other sons of Jacob aside for Shimon and Levi? Because you pointed the spotlight on Shimon and Levi, what they did. Well, what about all the other brothers? What was their solution?
I don't know, but to your earlier point, it does say that they were all shocked and furious, and they all declared that such a thing cannot be done. So, I think we'll get later in the story to why Simeon and Levi were the ones who actually executed the slaughter of the Hivites and why their brothers didn't participate. But I do think it's important to note that they were all shocked and furious, which also supports your contention that this was not a cultural norm of the time, because you would not be shocked, maybe furious, but certainly not shocked if it was a cultural norm at the time.
Yeah, but it wasn't, and the verse says so plainly.
Yeah. So far, we have Shechem kidnapping and raping and sodomizing a young girl, Jacob and his sons finding out, being extremely angry, Shechem's father, Hamor, then visiting with them and making them a deal that he's hoping that they can't refuse, which is essentially to tie their communities together through commerce and intermarriage. I'll continue here. Then Shechem said to Dina's father and brothers, "Let me but find favor in your eyes, and I will give you whatever you ask. Set the bridal price and gifts as high as you like. I will give whatever you ask of me. Only give me the young woman as my wife."
He wants to sweeten the deal. In addition to the commercial, economic, trade benefits, just charge a dowry, whatever you want, or reverse dowry, right? I'll pay whatever you want.
Okay,
He's so clearly infatuated and obsessed with Dina.
yeah. So this is really curious and fascinating. This girl, he is willing to pay whatever price for her. He kidnaps her, he rapes her, he sodomizes her, and then he falls in love with her. On what basis does he fall in love with her? And on what basis is he willing to pay any dowry price? And why would his father agree to this? Is there a subtext here? Was she that
I think the
remarkable of a
the
girl?
subtext is that this family and these people, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob's children, they are incredibly impressive. They're charismatic and they're talented and they're gifted in every possible way. And they're in the eyes of example, like he's willing to give up everything and also throw caution to the wind, as we shall see, to not sniff out the deceit that's incoming. But these are very, very impressive people. And by the way, this harkens back to another interaction between this family and the Hivites. You recall perhaps when Sarah died and Abraham needed a burial spot for his wife. So he meets and he interacts with the local populace and they just accord him tremendous honor. You're a prince of God amongst us, whatever you want, you could have. These were very significant and serious people in the eyes of their countrymen, their contemporaries.
Oh, were those Hivites that Abraham bought a cave from?
I believe that's correct. Let's go back to, I have my book here in front of me. That will be chapter 23, I believe. Sorry, I got mixed up. I made the old Hittites.
Hittites and Hivites. Okay. Easy mistake.
Forgive me. Yes, that's a Hivi and that's the Hitti.
Yeah.
Hivite, Hittite.
Maybe we could have
no relation.
No relation. Okay. I was going to say
no, they're different. They're different Canaanite nations. They are related, but they're all Canaanites.
Yeah.
Canaan was more of a general. They're different Canaanite nations. They are related, but they're all Canaanites.
Yeah.
Canaan was more of a general classification, and there's different families, different tribes amongst the Canaanites.
Okay. So far in the story, we're at the point where Shechem has offered anything that Jacob and his sons want in exchange for their daughter. And this is their response. Yaakov's sons responded to Shechem and his father Hamor, and they spoke deceptively. I've also heard this often translated as with guile. He had, after all, defiled their sister Dina. They told them, "We cannot do this. To give our sister to an uncircumcised man would be a disgrace to us. Only on one condition will we agree with you. If you become like us, circumcising all your males, then we will give you our daughters and take your daughters for ourselves. We will live with you and become one people. If you do not agree to be circumcised, we will take our daughter and go." Their words gratified Hamor and his son Shechem.
So this is their counter offer. We accept your terms, provided that you circumcise, and we can become one nation. Now, who's making this offer?
It says here that it's Yaakov's sons who respond.
Sons, who's that?
Well, he had 12 sons.
Only 11 of them are alive at this time. Benjamin hasn't been born yet.
Okay.
Oh, it's his sons, but it doesn't say any two of the sons. It seems like it's the collective agreement of the sons.
Yeah.
What about Jacob himself?
It does not refer to him in this passage.
Jacob takes the back seat here, right? He even waited till his sons came back from the field, you recall. So Jacob does not say anything really until the end of the story. Like, why is Jacob silent? Why are his sons speaking on his behalf?
Good question. I don't know. I could hazard some guesses. Is he very old? Is he trying to pass the torch to his sons?
No. So that's not what's happening over here. This is a disgrace. And to talk with these terrorists, it's beneath the honor and the dignity of Jacob. And therefore, Jacob appointed his sons to speak on his behalf because it's proper honor and respect to not make the patriarch, Jacob himself, have to interact with these people.
How do we know this?
Well, okay, so that's a good question. So first of all, that was the analysis of the Ramban. Ramban is Nachmanides, one of the great commentators on the Torah. We see throughout the Torah, children never should speak in front of their parents. We know that. Honor your parents is part of the Ten Commandments. We know that. The only person that there's an example of a child in the presence of their father or mother, child answering the question that really the father should have answered, it's only happened once in the Torah, aside for this, and that is when Laban spoke before his father, Bethuel. And all the commentaries agree this is because Laban is a crook, is a wily, deceptive kind of person, and everything that he does, we have to learn to do the opposite.
And this was in the episode where Jacob is trying to find a wife?
When Abraham's servant is trying to find a wife for Abraham's son, Isaac.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so there's an accepted understanding that when your father's present, you keep quiet.
Okay. And so here we are at the second and only other example of this. In the previous example, you mentioned that Laban was in the presence of his father. Are the sons in the presence of their father here, or has he sent them? Is Jacob at this meeting?
Well, let's see what it says. It doesn't say explicitly one way or the other. But regardless, this is something which Jacob's position should be manifested, should be spoken. So what the Ramban says, the way he understands why the brothers are at all interacting, is that they got instructions from Jacob, but they understood it's not appropriate for Jacob to speak. It's not fitting his honor. Therefore, they got directives from him, but they spoke.
So this was Yaakov's idea?
Okay, so what we see here is that the deception is here. Here's where the word deception appears in verse 13.
What is the Hebrew word for deception?
Nirma, deception.
And how do you feel about the translation guile or deceptively? With guile.
Nirma appears, I think, twice in the Torah, or at least up to this point. When Jacob usurped the blessings from his brother, Isaac tells Esau, your brother came bimirma, with deceptiveness. And in both instances, the translation of Onkelos, which is the most authoritative translation, and cited by Rashi, is that they translate the word mirma, which means deception, as chachma, as wisdom, cleverness. Word clever means intelligent, but also means a little bit sharp, a little bit
shrewd.
Yeah, a little shrewd. Yes.
Okay, great.
This is sharp, and there's deception here. But what's the deception here? Because the actual genocide, the slaughter, was done only by Shimon and Levi. It appears that the deception is in place here. And by the way, I just noticed now, in verse 11, it says, the father and the brothers are present. So that's explicit.
Okay. So they're all there. Yaakov's sons are the ones who actually respond. They respond with this kind of clever, shrewd deception. I'll just say that I have a theory here that I haven't necessarily heard before. I'm sure you can shoot it down for everyone, but I thought maybe that the deception and the cleverness and the shrewdness was that they did not anticipate Shechem and Hamor to accept this offer, and they thought that therefore they would just return Dina because they didn't want to go to war with Jacob and his sons.
Okay, not only am I not going to shoot that down, I'm going to congratulate you.
Thank you.
Because there's an essay here by the Ramban, again, the second most famous commentator in the Torah, and the most significant Jew of his time. After the Rambam, Maimonides, comes the Ramban and Nachmanides.
Okay.
And it was by far and away, the greatest Jew of the 13th century. And in his essay, in this verse, he says this was the plan that Jacob had and Jacob's sons had, all of them, not just Shimon and Levi, all of them, was to say, there's no way you'll do it. We'll just make the terms so disagreeable that you'll say, okay, we can't do it. Fine, here's Dina. We'll try something else, right? That was the original plan.
That's amazing. I just have to say that part of me is thrilled to know that I came up with an idea that Nachmanides himself originated, but I'm also disappointed because my one goal in life is to come up with an original interpretation of Torah, which is probably a nearly impossible task these days, but I'm going to still keep
Well,
at it.
I'm going to take the other side of this. I think that you should make a kiddush in the shul and own it and celebrate with your family and rent out a hall and get it catered to celebrate the fact that you said the same thing that the Ramban said.
I'm definitely sponsoring the Cholent this Shabbat.
Yes. Cholent means the reason. Then he adds more. So what was the backup plan? What was the plan B? Suppose they would accept. What was Jacob and all the brothers' plan in this deceptive offer?
That is such a great point, because you can never go into a negotiation assuming that you know what's going to happen, right? And obviously Jacob and his sons were far too wise and experienced to not have a plan B. So They make this offer. According to Ramban, Nachmanides, they assumed that these terms were going to be too steep and not going to be accepted, but they had their plan B. So
and again, I want to stress the point that if you were to ask Pinker and his crowd, well, where's the deception? They would think it's with the murder.
Yeah.
And again, the Ramban notices that and he explains what deception was. So the plan was, okay, we'll make it too hard, an offer they cannot possibly accept.
Yeah.
And then we could resolve this amicably.
Yeah.
And if they do, suppose everyone agrees the whole town circumcised. Imagine what it takes to get like a whole town. We don't know how big this town was, but assume the town is, 20 people at least, 100 people, something like that. Try to persuade 100 men to circumcise.
Right.
That's a tall task.
Yes.
But suppose you do that. Well, the plan was, says the Ramban, to come in on the third day and to they're all in bed and they're all bleeding and they're all incapacitated, grab Dina and leave.
So Ramban says that was the plan B. On what basis does he say that? How does he know that was the plan, not to slaughter the Hittites?
Because this is the deception that was set up. And then the departure from that is when you read a few verses later that the two sons of Jacob depart from the plan.
Okay, well, let's get there. Let me read the
Yeah, so the plan was, let me just finish the point. The plan of all the brothers and Jacob was to just rescue Dina using either they'll reject the offer or they'll accept it, but then they'll be weakened. We'll come grab her. We'll leave. They'll be circumcised, not the end of the world, but we'll have our daughter back. But under no circumstances did they actually entertain giving their daughter to this monster. That was never a plan. And when they indicated they would, that was deceptive. Deceptive.
Very interesting. I want to revisit a point I brought up a little earlier, which is now that they've accepted, and obviously Yaakov and his sons thought that was a slight possibility that they would accept. If their plan B was, okay, well, if they accept and they circumcise themselves, then we will go rescue Dina, not kill the Hivites, but rescue Dina. Well, it's interesting. There are two things that strike me as interesting. Number one,
maybe kill Shem as well.
Maybe kill Shem.
It's hard to defend the innocence of Shem. Like that individual, at least, is guilty by everyone's standards. That kind of behavior is not tolerated.
Okay. So, two things strike me as interesting. One, that they use this holy thing, which is circumcision, as part of their deception. And two, if they have to go to plan B and they go and they rescue Dina, even if they kill Shem, now you've got a whole town that's circumcised and could possibly pass themselves off as Jews in the future.
So here's the thing. In America today, still, 75% of males are circumcised? When we say circumcision, it's not necessarily a covenant. If someone wants to circumcise their child, but they are not thinking about a covenant, they're thinking about because they want to have a lower incidence rates of herpes or whatever it is. Or because that's just what is done in America. In Europe, they don't circumcise. Here, they do whatever. This is what we do. They do it in the hospital. It's no big deal. That's not a circumcision of the covenant of Abraham, right? That's just, in the eyes of the Torah, they would still be uncircumcised because there's no covenant at all. It wasn't done with the right protocol and the right setting and the right circumstances of a covenant. I will tell you, by the way, this may be a surprise to some. If a child, a Jewish baby, is circumcised in the hospital, 2 days after the born, day after the born, in the eyes of the Torah, by the halachic standard, they are uncircumcised. They would need a second circumcision. Now, the problem is, how do you do a second circumcision when there is no foreskin left, right? That's a different question. There is a way to do that. But the point is that circumcision does not necessarily equal the mark of the Jew, the mark of the covenant.
So do we know if Yaakov's sons were requiring a halachic circumcision such as it existed at this time, or if they were just saying just the removal of the foreskin? And how could they convince the Hivites that this was, going to be enough? I mean, if I was one of the Hivites, if I was Hamor or Shechem, I might think to myself, I mean, maybe they didn't have intimate enough knowledge of the circumcision practices of Jacob and his sons, but if they did, they might have seen through the ruse.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a different way that the circumcision is actually done. There's an extra step that's done to make it conforming with the Torah, whereas the earlier circumcisions, let's say done to the Keturah children, or maybe even to Ishmael, wasn't exactly following that protocol. But more importantly, the circumcision is the acceptance of the covenant. These people didn't want the covenant. What they wanted the daughters, they wanted the relationships, they wanted the economic benefits, they wanted what they were sold.
So Yaakov's sons were not requiring that they become members of the covenant, just that they
weren't sophisticated enough to know that. They're like, oh, these guys are circumcised, we'll be circumcised, we'll be like them.
Okay.
They didn't understand what that meant. They didn't understand that, no, just, doing a minor surgery, that's not going to make you part of us, really. There's a lot of history that goes into it. That when a baby is circumcised, there's two blessings that are said. There's one blessing up on the mitzvah of circumcision. And there's a second blessing, which has nothing to do apparently with the circumcision. And that is, lahachniso b'riso shel Avraham Avinu, to enter this young child into the covenant of Abraham. That part, there's no way for these people to even know what that's about. They don't know who Abraham is, and they don't understand the implications and the symbolism and the existential transformation that's happening when someone's entering the covenant of Abraham.
Okay, I could ask more questions about this, but I think we'll move on to the next few verses here. Their words gratified Hamor and his son Shechem. The young man, the most honored of his father's family, lost no time in doing it, because he longed for Yaakov's daughter. Hamor and his son Shechem came to the town gate and spoke to their fellow townsmen. Quote, "These people are friendly toward us," they said. "Let them live in the land and trade in it. We have space enough for them. We can marry their daughters, and they can marry ours. But only on one condition will they agree to dwell with us as one people. Every male among us must be circumcised as they are. Will not their livestock, property, and their animals be ours? Let us then agree to their terms and let them settle among us." All the people who went out by the town gate listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and all the males who went out by the town gates were circumcised. All right, so lot going on in these last couple of verses. Maybe you can just go ahead and as I have questions, I'll ask them.
Yeah, well, he sells the plan, unaware that he's, setting a trap for himself, and he tells them, these people, they're peaceful with us, they're agreeable to us, and then we're going to make this big happy family and forget about the crimes that happened. We'll marry their daughters, and we'll take these incredible young men as sons-in-law for our daughters. And they were very wealthy. We know Jacob was very, very wealthy. So he's the kind of person that you want to develop economic ties with. And it was persuasive enough that everyone agreed to circumcise.
So are the townspeople aware that this is happening because Shem wants to marry Dina? They don't mention that explicitly, as far as I can see in this sales pitch to their town people. They're basically telling them, hey, if we all get circumcised, we can essentially become one with these people, which also reverts back to our previous discussion that in their minds, they're entering the covenant, or in their minds, they're going to become one with Jacob and his sons. They're going to become the same people if they do this and have access to all the wealth.
It is noteworthy. Twice in this narrative, it says that they will become one nation. You read it as one people, but Am really means a nation, like Am Yisrael Chai. The Hebrew says that will become one Am, one nation. And that's part of the pitch given to Shechem and his father. And it's part of what Shechem and his father told the townspeople, will become one nation. Meaning take two nations and meld them together into one. This is important to note because that may be one argument to justify the violence of Shimon Levi, is the fact that this was an attack from one nation on a second nation.
Shechem and Hamor do their best to sell this to the townspeople, and they highlight livestock, women, property, animals. And I don't know what the difference between livestock and animals are, if you have any insight into that, or what the Hebrew might be. But again, this is what they highlight. They don't say to their townspeople,
like smaller animals versus larger animals. Livestock is like bovines, cows.
Yeah. So they don't take the townspeople to the gate and say, Hamor doesn't say, hey, listen, my son fell in love with this girl. The only way that her family will allow Shechem to marry her is if we do this, right? It seems a little bit cynical the way he's selling it to his people. I don't know if they just knew what was going on, because I have read commentaries where the Hivites were aware of the fact that Shechem had kidnapped and raped this girl. So,
but that's certainly not what's being emphasized.
So they agree to it. The males agree to it. So I'll continue on here. On the third day, when the people were weak from their pain, two of Yaakov's sons, Shimon and Levi, Dina's brothers, took their swords, entered the unsuspecting town, and killed every single male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem by the sword, took Dina from Shechem's house, and left. So it's the third day after they were circumcised, which I have read commentaries that say that's when the pain is the greatest, and the Hivite men would have been the weakest.
Yes, which, by the way, we know from earlier in the Torah, when Abraham, after his circumcision, was day 3 of his circumcision, when God appeared to him, and that's when he meets the 3 angels, mastering his men. You remember that story from chapter 18 of Genesis.
Yes, and he puts on quite a feast for them in spite of his probably great...
Yes, and I have spoken to converts who were circumcised as adults, and they attest to this too.
So here we get to the question of, why was it only these two? And why didn't their brothers participate? So what do we know about it?
Well, what we know is that this is a decision that they made together, and the other ones did not want to participate in it.
They
thought it was a mistake.
So did Shimon and Levi tell their brothers that they were going to do this? Did they invite them to join them, or did they sneak out and do it because they knew that their brothers wouldn't approve, or they didn't care?
The simple understanding is that they went rogue, they made this decision, and they decided to do it. And the others, whether they're aware of it or not, they would not have done it. Especially in light of the Ramban's commentary, that the plan was to just, come in and take the daughter, take Dina, but they come in with their swords, right?
This is maybe the pivotal moment in the chapter or in this story, and the one that I think Steven Pinker focuses the most on in his analysis. And the one that is maybe the most interesting is, why did these two brothers do it? Were they justified in doing it? What was their own justification to themselves, if we can infer that? Why did they think...
I think that's a central question, right?
Yeah.
Because these two people are sons of Jacob and fathers of tribes of our people. Anyone who is a Kohen today or a Levite is a descendant of Levi, of this person. So he's a very significant person. And all the Levites, so Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, their children, Pinchas, Elazar, everyone comes from this family. So we have to find a way to understand what were they thinking, how were they justifying their behavior.
Is there a thread of this kind of hot-headedness or anger in the descendants of Levi that we note in Torah?
Yes. Okay, so it's important to note, before we understand the rationale, the justification of Shimon and Levi, we have to recognize that Jacob himself disapproves of what they did. So in this story, so you just fast forward to verse 30, so after the genocide was perpetrated, Jacob says, why do you do it? He challenges them. And he says, you made a mistake. That's number one. Number two, at the end of the book of Genesis, this is when Jacob's on his deathbed, the last day of his life, he summons his sons, and he very harshly and stridently criticizes Shimon and Levi for their behavior. And he curses their anger, and then their wrath, and their rage.
I have that here. He says, Shimon and Levi are brothers, weapons of violence their wares. Let me never join their counsel, nor my honor be of their assembly. For in their anger they killed men. At their whim they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is most fierce, and their fury, for it is most cruel. I will divide them up in Yaakov and scatter them in Israel.
This is a very harsh, it's almost a curse that Jacob levies on Levi. Shimon, right? It's very harsh. Accursed is their anger, and he's like, he wants to dissociate himself from them. So obviously, Jacob believes that they made a mistake. So it's important for us to understand, A, why did they do what they did, and B, where exactly did they deviate from the perspective of Jacob?
So I want to revisit Jacob's reactions and responses when we get there. But let me ask again, do we have any insight into why they decided to go rogue?
We do. And in fact, the greatest of the commentators all discuss this question. And I assembled 5 different perspectives on this question, on the central question. And I guess we'll start with the most controversial, third rail of them. And that is Maimonides. Maimonides talks about this. And he says that every single male in that city was guilty of a capital crime. Shimon and Levi were justified with what they did. They were justified in doing what they did because every single person in that city, the males at least, were guilty of a capital crime. And they just executed the guilty. Now, what was their capital crime? So what he says is, and this is a very controversial piece, as we shall see, because a lot of the commentators, when they try to answer this question, they say, let's start with the Rambam. And then they disagree with the Rambam. So this is a very controversial take. And the consequences, by the way, of this position in the Rambam are very significant. Because if you just play out in your head, well, okay, where else would this apply? If Rambam justifies the behavior of Shimon and Levi, and then we can very easily extend that justification to modern times. So what the Rambam says is like this: there is a requirement, one of the 7 universal Noahide laws, to have a system of justice, to have a system of laws, law and order, and not allow anarchy to reign.
Okay, so he's saying this on the basis of Noahide law. So can you just give us a quick explanation of what that is?
Yeah, so Noahide, we mentioned Noah earlier. He's the one who survived the flood, and thus we think of all humanity as descendant from Noah. So one strand of Noah's family is, of course, Abraham. So that's the Jewish people, separate category. But all of humanity can be described as all of the descendants of Noah. And that's when you say Noahide law, it's law that is universal.
That every person is bound by.
Yes. If someone is Jewish, well, they have the whole Torah that they're obligated to follow, whether they know that or not, and whether they observe or not. We understand that they're part of this nation, and the nation requires that they are compliant with all the laws of the Torah. Well, what does that mean? They got to celebrate Shabbos, and they got to celebrate the festivals. They got to eat matzah on Pesach. They got to have mezuzah in their door. They have to wear tefillin every day, and so on. Got to say the prayers. Got to say the Shema. Got to eat the kosher food exclusively. But many, many, many such laws. Those laws do not apply universally. They're not to all of the descendants of Noah. However, the Torah itself says that all of humanity, all of the descendants of Noah, are obligated by 7 universal laws.
And are these laws written in the Torah?
Yes. And they appear earlier before Abraham even.
So all of humanity, the Torah itself says that all of humanity is bound by these 7 laws, including Jews.
Yes, of course, yes.
And
even though, just to be precise, the details of these laws may be different for Jews and non-Jews.
Okay. So Rambam...
the parameters are different.
Okay. So Rambam Maimonides says that because the Hivites were not adhering to these laws, they were guilty, and Shimon and Levi were simply meting out justice.
Yes.
So let me ask you this. How do we know whether or not the Hivites were aware of these laws? And if they weren't aware of them, are they bound by them? Because there are a lot of people who've never heard of Noahide law.
That's a very good question. And that question is also very well legislated in the literature. And one answer is ignorance of the law doesn't mean you're not bound by it. This is the rules that God set forth for all the descendants of Noah. Whether you know about it or not, you're still bound by those laws. If someone does, God forbid, they embezzle money. They didn't know that I have to report, that I cannot do insider trade. And no one told me. That doesn't matter, right? That's one way to think about it. There's another way to think about it, and that is that each one of these 7 Noahide laws are actually laws that you don't need to have external instruction to. They're all logical laws. Thus, any human with an operational intellect can deduce that these are appropriate, that these are necessary, that these are mandatory. One of them is that you have to have a system of laws. And when there's lawlessness, that a man could just grab any woman he wants and do whatever he wants to that person, and there's no one who's stopping them, no one's getting up and saying this is inappropriate, no one's protesting this, it means that they all endorse it.
So this is, according to Maimonides, the Noahide law that the Hivite men breached.
Yes. They all saw what happened, and they all knew what happened.
What is the law exactly?
So the law is to have law.
To have laws.
Yes. And they saw lawlessness. They saw objective crime, terrible, unconscionable crime, and they did nothing about it. And
so what should the Hivite men have done?
They should have stopped it. They should have protested. They should have arrested him.
So they should have stopped it if they were able. But let's say they weren't able. Let's say they weren't aware of it until after the fact. What should they have done after the fact?
That question is asked by the commentators. They say, wait, I told you there's a very controversial piece in the Rambam.
Yep.
And the commentators themselves pose that question. Wait a minute, he's a prince. He's got security. You can just go, you're just a regular average Joe member of this city. You're just a regular resident. What could you possibly do? You can't go arrest him. And that's why Rambam's position is challenged from multiple fronts. One of them is the question that you posed. Wait a minute, how could you say that I should go judge, I should go arrest the mayor, I should go arrest the prince of the... I can't do that. So therefore, I should not be liable, I should be culpable for not doing something about it.
I'm just thinking...
That's one of the sharpest questions on the Rambam's position. But again, this is what the Rambam says, and this is the most controversial justification of what Shimon and Levi did. They killed the guilty. And why were they guilty? Because they allowed lawlessness and anarchy to reign, and they did nothing about it. And that is in itself a capital offense. That's what the Rambam is saying.
Well, Rambam would have been a great guest for Third Rail Judaism because he has many such cases of him saying things that were controversial. But
listen to this. I told you that this plays out once we're getting controversial, right? So let's talk about the innocent Gazans.
Yeah.
You ready to go there?
Sure.
So I was thinking, wait a minute, according to this Rambam, anyone who is aware of crime and tolerates it, even if they're not in charge per se, but they do nothing to try to stop it, Shimon and Levi could walk into their city and chop their heads off, and the Rambam would say they're justified. Now, again, it's important to note, Jacob disagrees with Shimon and Levi. So you have to understand, according to the Rambam, wait, is he justifying Shimon and Levi? So why is Jacob challenging what they did? He obviously doesn't agree with them. So Levi were right, maybe Jacob was right, which is another realm to this discussion. But I found on this question, sorry, I'm over speaking over you. There was the chief rabbi of the Israeli Defense Force was a man named Rabbi Goren. And he was talking about terrorist sympathizers, supporters of the PLO, supporters, even if they're civ supporters of terrorists. And he cites this Rambam. And he says, first thing he says is that they have no right to live in the land of Israel. And I can read you the quote here. It's in Hebrew, so I'll just translate it. If someone gives a hand to an intifada, and even if they know about it and they don't say anything about it, and they don't stop the terrorists and the murderers, then they are included in this Rambam. That, according to this Rambam, who says that Shimon and Levi were justified, it would be justified to knock out not just the terrorists, but the quote-unquote innocent Gazans who are tacitly supporting it, which is, again, a very controversial position to take. As someone who doesn't do any active acts of terrorists, but stands by idly while terrorism and wanton murder and bloodlust and slaughter is happening and do nothing about it, that in itself, their passive, their tacit acceptance of it would be grounds for them to be guilty of a capital crime. Now, he doesn't say that explicitly. He just says, look at the Rambam. I think he's trying to avoid getting arrested by the ICC. But this is why it's a very controversial piece, because I don't know of anyone who would advocate for this today.
It is a fascinating topic for what is happening right now in the wake of October 7th. I think that the appearance of collective punishment is what upsets a lot of people. And of course, I do not think that collective punishment is what's happening, but the Rambam is actually saying it's not collective punishment. Each person is guilty on their own merit or lack thereof for the crime of not enforcing justice.
Yes.
And maybe they couldn't have stopped the prince, but maybe after the fact, they should have had some kind of a legal system in order to put him on trial or convict him. I don't know if Rambam goes that far or gets that detailed about what they should have
judged him. That's what he says. They should have judged him. Now, I will tell you this is controversial because the Ramban, so Nachmanides, challenges Rambam, and he says, wait a minute. If this is true, if they were justified, well, why does Jacob get angry at them? Why does he criticize them? Maybe he should have done it himself.
Also, why, if they were justified, why wouldn't they have gotten their brothers on board?
Exactly. So why did the brothers not join? Why did Jacob not join? And why did Jacob criticize them? So obviously, Jacob's behavior indicates that he disagreed with them.
Yeah.
And he did not believe that what they did was justified.
Yeah. And it brings up, like, the Noahide laws are one thing, but the question is always, what are the punishments? So is the punishment for breaking a Noahide law always capital punishment?
Well, this is a part
also, you could say that Shimeon and Levi did not follow Noahide law either in that they did not put the Hivites men on trial.
Okay, so that's a very good question. And there's a lot of literature on exactly how these Noahide laws are adjudicated. Mm-hmm. And there's a big debate as to whether or not, suppose you and I are aware of these Noahide laws. Are we obligated to go enforce them?
Hmm.
And that's not necessarily so. But there is a position that states that the due process can be waived. Due process can be waived. So putting all those pieces together, the Rambam justifies the behavior of Shimon and Levi. But again, the question is, A, well, why did the brothers not join? B, well, why did Jacob not join? C, why did Jacob criticize them after the matter? Why did they punish them? Maybe he should have praised them. They were brave to be willing to endanger themselves to do what's right. Well, how come he criticizes them 50 years later? Now, we'll add one more thing. And this is what you mentioned earlier. The Maharal, again, a very significant personality, not one of the medieval sages, but one of the earlier Achronim, which is the later sages, but later is relative, like he lived in the 1500s. He challenges Rambam by saying, Maimonides, by saying, wait a minute, he's the prince, and they were terrified of him, and he was the prince of the land, and there's nothing they could have done to try to stop him. And there's a principle that if you cannot fulfill a mitzvah, you're not obligated to undertake that. If you know it's suicidal to go challenge the prince, well, then you're not going to be held accountable for not doing it. And therefore, he says, that is not grounds to justify the behavior of Shimon and Levi.
So Shimon and Levi go rogue. They probably do not tell their brothers what they're going to do, which, interpret as you will, but to me, that's an indication that maybe they thought that their brothers would try to stop them or would have other ideas, and they didn't want to do that, which is, I think, an indication of what Jacob says later, that they had a lot of anger. I'd love to talk about why they were so angry, if there are any commentaries on that, on why these two were such hotheads.
It seems like that was a characteristic that they had. It's a personality type that you have to control. Otherwise, it can lead you towards very dark places. And that's why Jacob was telling them about it and trying to encourage them to take steps to remediate it.
Now, with the principle that every word in the Torah is there for a reason, it says, two of Yaakov's sons, Shimon and Levi, Dina's brothers. Why does it add Dina's brothers?
Well, that's a great question. And that's 100% the right question to ask. That's part of the reason why they did it. They acted out of brotherhood and of kinship towards their sister.
But then why didn't the other 9 guys? They're brothers too.
Okay, well, so here's the point. I'll share with you Rashi's answer to your question. Shimon and Levi, how old were they? If Dina was 8 years and 1 month, how old were Shimon and Levi? They were 12 and 13, respectively. So think about what it takes. We don't know how many people were in the city, but we assume it's a city, it's a nation. Let's just assume it's a couple of dozen for sure, right? And they're men, and they have defenses. Shimon and Levi are 2 teenagers, or even at 12, little kids.
Yep.
They're doing something. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's inappropriate, but it's certainly courageous. It's certainly valiant. So what Rashi says is that Shimon and Levi did something which was an act of sacrifice for their sister. They wanted to rescue their sister, and they were willing to do things even if that meant that they can endanger themselves. They're undertaking a rescue mission, a violent rescue mission, kill or be killed. So whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing, it's certainly brave. And the reason why they did it is because they're trying to rescue their sister. And because they were so brave in trying to rescue their sister, the Torah says, this is an act of true brotherhood. You are the true brothers of Dina. Whether they did right or wrong, there was something about what they did that was an act of sacrifice and self-endangerment for their sister, and thus they earned the right to be the brothers of Dina.
I can't remember if I read this somewhere or not, but were they also maternal brothers as well as paternal brothers?
Yeah, that's right. So Jacob has 4 wives, and the first wife he marries, with another deception, of course, is Leah. And with Leah, Jacob bears 6 sons and 1 daughter. And the 6 sons are Reuven, and then Shimon, Levi, and then Judah, Yisachar, Issachar, Zevulun, and then Dina. So they're actual full siblings.
So there were other maternal brothers of Dina who did not participate in this.
Correct. That would be Reuven, Yehuda, Zevulun, and Yisachar.
Okay.
And by the way, I will note that at the end of the end of Genesis, chapter 49, where Jacob dispenses punishment or criticism, he says, Shimon v'Levi achim, the brothers. Again, he identifies them as those who are brothers, who act in brotherhood and in kinship. But maybe a bit too much because they're using violence and the rage must be cursed.
All right. So Shimon and Levi, Dina's brothers, enter the town, kill every single male. They killed Hamor and his son.
Want me to tell you about some of the other justifications?
Oh, yeah, please.
Okay, so there's a few other justifications for this behavior. The Ramban himself offers a justification for why they killed the male inhabitants of the city. He says these people are guilty of crimes, unrelated to the matter at hand. So yeah, Shechem and Hamor, abduction, rape, they're guilty of crimes, but everyone else, they were guilty of unrelated crimes. And Jacob's problem was, but you misled them. You said circumcise them. Maybe they would have repented had you given them a chance. So yes, that's the way of making sure that what Jacob said and what the brothers said are both justified. The brothers, Shimon and Levi, they killed the members of the city because they're guilty of unrelated crimes they were not even aware of. Each one that they killed was guilty of a crime. But Jacob said, well, you told them circumcise, and you probably explained to them what that means. And maybe they would have repented properly, and they could have been spared. So that's the way he explains it. There's another two interpretations from the Or HaChaim, where he says that their intention was only to kill the perpetrators. But of course, Shem and Hamor were the king, the prince of the city, and therefore everyone else came to defend them. So, and they came to attack Shimon and Levi. And when someone attacks you, you attack them back. So they killed Shem and Hamor because of their crimes against Dina, and they killed everyone else because they were attacking them. Had they just laid down their arms and said, do what you want with the perpetrators, they would have survived. And it's also noteworthy, just what was the order of the killing here?
Well, it says that they killed every single male, and then in the next line it says they killed Hamor and Shechem by the sword.
So wouldn't by any measure they should kill Shechem and Hamor first?
Yeah.
No,
Unless they were on their way to do that, and the townspeople were trying to stop them before they got there.
Yes. That's exactly what he says. He says, if you look at the positioning, it was first they killed the members of the city because those were the ones who came to defend them, to prevent them from reaching the palace, to rescue their sister, and to attack them. Okay, you attack me, I'll attack you back. That's just the rules. Sorry, self-defense. Castle doctrine. That's his justification, meaning that they were not guilty of any crime, but they attacked Shimon and Levi, and thus Shimon and Levi attacked them back and defended themselves, even by violent means. And the final interpretation, which I referenced earlier.
Of course, I just will interject to say that doesn't make any sense, because if that were the case, they would have just waited for their plan B with all of their brothers to go in and rescue Dina, even if that meant killing Shem and Hamor. If that was just their plan, then they would have waited. So it seems to me more likely that their intention was to kill the Hivite men.
I will just note that the plan A, plan B, plan C of the Ramban is not necessarily the understanding of the Or HaChaim. So the two commentators are not necessarily working with the same understanding as to what the original plan would have been.
Yeah.
Now, the last interpretation, which I find to be maybe the most persuasive of them all, comes courtesy of the Maharal. Maharal doesn't like Rambam's opinion. He's like, well, you can't blame someone for trying to, not stopping the king or the prince. So what's his interpretation? He says, you have two nations here. And he stresses the point that I mentioned earlier, the observation that there were one nation, which was the Canaanites, the Hivites, and then the Israelites, sons of Israel, sons of Jacob. So there were not one nation. The plan was to make them into one nation. But what happens when a nation attacks another nation? What are the rules of war for such a circumstance? If there is a war, there is justification of violence. Everyone accepts that. It's the oldest rule in the world. There's a war between Russia and Ukraine. Well, why are they fighting? I don't know why they're fighting, but there's a war here, right? If I shoot the enemy combatant, it's not murder, it's war. It's a different class of violence. We have a nation here, the Israelite nation. It's a small nation, it's a fledgling nation, it's a nascent nation, but it's a nation. And they were attacked by members, even leaders of a different nation. That justifies violence. That's his understanding of what justified their behavior.
So the Maharal says that essentially once Shem kidnaps and rapes Dina, now these nations are in a state of war.
Yes.
And the negotiations between them could be seen as negotiations to end a war, essentially.
Maybe, but also it was a ruse, as we know. All warfare is deception, right?
It's a ruse, but it's also, there is a potential in that scenario, according to some commentators, for the war to end there. If Shem and Hamor said, you know what, we can't adhere to your request, we're going to give you Dina back. At that point, would the war have ended, or would have
Maybe, potentially.
but not necessarily. Shimon and Levi could have said, you know what? Or the other brothers might have said, you returned Dina, but your transgression was so great that we're going to make you pay for it. Or they could have said, great, we got Dina back. We're unhappy with what they did. Maybe they would have asked for Dina back in addition to some other kind of compensation for defiling her. That didn't happen in any case, so we don't know the answer to that.
It's a counterfactual. But he does stress the point that there are innocent people, collateral damage, who die in war. If I'm a Japanese guy, I didn't make the decision to attack Pearl Harbor. Why are you firebombing me? What did I do? It's a good question. Was there justification to drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? I don't know. It's a serious question, but that's what happens in war. Innocent people die in war. There's no war where no innocent people die. So, okay, there were people here that were innocent, but I'm sorry, your leader started a war, and wars are very bloody, and who should you blame? It's like the Gazans. A lot of Gazans were innocent, okay? They didn't kidnap or assault or murder any Israelis, any Jews. So how come their houses are destroyed, and how come their lives are upended? Who's to blame for that? Well, who started the war? The war was started by Hamas. It's Hamas's fault. There's innocent death. Well, whose fault is that? Who started the war? Hamas started the war. They're guilty. So it's a terrible, terrible tragedy when it happens, but sorry, that's what happens in war. In war, innocents die, and thus the culpability of that is placed at the hands of those who started the war. And in this case, it was Shem who instigated this conflict.
They killed Hamor and his son Shem by the sword, took Dina from Shem's house, and left. Yaakov's sons came upon the dead and plundered the town that had defiled their sister. They took their flocks, their cattle, their donkeys, and everything else of theirs in the town and out in the field. Their wealth, their children, and their women they took captive and looted.
So it's clear who is doing this. Or this seems like it's not just Shimon and Levi, this is everyone, right?
Yes, this sounds like all of Yaakov's sons. Shimon and Levi go in and slaughter the Hivite men and get their sister. And left, it says. So they, presumably returned home. At that point, Yaakov's sons all enter the town and loot it. Take everything. Like literally everything. Women, children, livestock, possessions. They take it from the houses. They take it from the fields.
I want to read this very carefully because you said literally everything. When you go to verse 29.
Their wealth, their children, and their
let's go to the Hebrew.
Okay.
Go to the Hebrew.
Great.
Es kol chelam. The word kol. What does it mean? It means all. All of their wealth. Ves kol tapam, and all their youth. Ves, and also nishehem, their women. It does not say kol nishehem. So again, Pinker and King James edition, and even the Korah, it's hard to get that nuance. So you have one verse, one word is kol chelam, kol tapam. Whoa, nishehem doesn't say kol. So I saw for the first time today one of the commentators that says, wait a minute, what this plunder, this booty taking, it seems to be comprehensive. You said it was comprehensive, but it's not. It says kol chelam. Even in the earlier verse, it doesn't say the word kol, right? Sonam, which means their sheep, their livestock, their donkeys, what's in the fields, in the city. And then it says kol chelam, all their wealth, kol tapam, and then nishayim, their women, does not say that. Shavavai vozu, they plundered. Ves kol ashavavai, everything that's in the house. So you have 4 themes in that verse, and 3 of them it says the word kol, which means all, and then women's does not say all. So one of the commentators notices that and says, why not? Why did they not take all the women? And what he says is, well, they didn't take any women because the women are not guilty.
They didn't take all the women, but they took some.
No.
So according to this commentator, they were distinguishing between guilty and not guilty women?
No, that's not what it says here. The commentary assumes that none of the women are guilty. So the women that joined were the women who wanted to join this nation and wanted to convert, wanted to enter the covenant of Abraham. Those women were welcomed. The ones who did not want that, they weren't guilty, but they weren't deserving of joining this nation, and they were just left there.
And that's interesting because they took all the children.
Yeah, so I imagine the children, because they're children, they can be incorporated into the nation.
Right.
But the adult women, ones who want to undertake joining this nation, then they're welcome to join. If they're not interested, well, then they can stay behind. That's okay. But it does recast the understanding of what was the goal of taking these people. Now, the plunder, I would argue that the plunder of the actual wealth, that is also a bit of a deterrent. This is what the Romans did. And this is what a lot of people in warfare, what they do is you want to make sure that you exact a penalty for instigating a conflict. That's what's happening right now in Gaza. If Gaza is just restored to the way it was earlier, there's no penalty, then there's no deterrent for this happening again. It has to be that there is a stiff penalty, and that will serve as a deterrent. So
one might think that the destruction of Gaza itself would be a stiff enough deterrent.
Well, they'll build it up.
History has shown us that is not the case.
Yeah, they'll build it up, and what will stop them from doing it again? So I think it's very important, if you want to restore your deterrence, to make sure that not only will terrorism not succeed, but it'll be very pricey, very, very pricey. You see what they did here? Now, again, Jacob does not challenge them on this behavior. His problem is the murder, the slaughter of the innocents, the quote-unquote innocents. And we see the justification that Shimon Levi may have had and why Jacob maybe was not persuaded by it. But the idea that you exact a penalty from those who do terrible things, I think, is being conveyed here.
So Yaakov's sons, Shimon and Levi commit their act, and then the sons come and take advantage of it. It doesn't say what their attitude was towards what their brothers had done. But obviously, once it was done, they found it appropriate or justified to go and loot the town.
Yes, and we don't see any. Well, I will note that the brothers do not criticize Shimon and Levi.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why they don't do it is because Jacob's here, and he's our patriarch, and we're going to follow what he says. If he wants to criticize, that's his decision. If he wants to ignore it, it's also his decision. The brothers would be very, very wary to impose their opinion on the behavior of Shimon and Levi. They're not going to do that.
Now, the obvious shocking thing here is the actions of Shimon and Levi.
Yes.
But maybe because their actions are so shocking, I'm just realizing, the other brothers, now also what they do could be construed as somewhat shocking or potentially unethical. They take advantage of what their brothers have done, and they go steal or loot all of the possessions of this town, or most of the possessions of this town. They could have just as easily said, okay, well, look, we got Dina back. All the Hivite men have died. Enough is enough. We're now going to leave these people to their own devices to kind of pick up the pieces, heal, hopefully be better in the future. Why didn't they do that? Why did they then go in and loot?
I would speculate that the reason why is because it's important to reinstitute a deterrent and to make sure that everyone knows that this is not acceptable behavior. And if it does happen, then it's going to be absolute devastation upon you, your city, and your resources, your wealth. Everything is fair game.
Mm-hmm. And they may have also felt, justified or not, we've created an enemy here, and we can't allow them, it's similar to what you were saying before, we can't allow them to rebuild to the state that they were previously, where they might get the idea in their head to take revenge.
But again, no one criticizes them for this behavior. It was actually justified.
Okay. Here we have the last few verses, which entail Yaakov's reaction. Yaakov said to Shimon and Levi, "You have brought trouble upon me. You have made me odious to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, and parasites. I am few in number, and if they join forces and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed. But they said, should our sister be treated like a whore? So it's interesting to me, I've also seen people uncomfortable with this because Yaakov, at this point, we read the other verses where he criticizes them for the ethical and moral conduct. Here, the criticism seems to be much more practical. Like,
Yes.
because of what you guys did, now we are in danger.
Yes.
And I also just kind of noticed that he says, you have brought trouble upon me. You have made me odious to the inhabitants of the land. He didn't even say us. Later, he does say, I am few in number, and if they join forces and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed. But for the most part, he's focusing on himself. So how do we understand this?
It's a good question. It's a very sharp observation. I imagine that what he's saying to them is, this is actually worse than endangering the family. Because the endanger of the family, you're not worried about it. So you're not scared of danger. But the honor of your father, that's something which is sacrosanct. And therefore, what he's saying is, you should have considered that as well. Now, I think the dog not barking is the fact that Jacob does not levy the criticism that he waits 50 years to levy, right? At this time, if you do the math, Jacob is 97 years old. And he dies at 147. So it's exactly 50 years before that bedtime or the deathbed revealing of his true feelings. Shimon later. But he harbors those thoughts for 50 years and does not mention anything of it. He does talk about the pragmatic decision that he did and not evaluating the morality of it, but just the consequences of it. Maybe you should have taken a different course because look at the consequences. Like, what does it mean to my standing and to the attacks that may come from neighboring towns? Like, you didn't think about all those other knock-on effects. But he does not mention a thing about his true feelings, where he says it's stolen craft and it's violence, and you're like Esav a little bit, and don't mention me when you get in your congregation, when you gather together, don't mention me. Cursed is their rage. Like, he speaks very, very harshly and very specifically about their behavior, but he waits 50 years. Jacob did not want to criticize them because that would not be beneficial. You only criticize when it's beneficial. It would not be in this case, so he does not mention it.
Interesting. So he basically gives them practical reasons for why their behavior was not ideal, which he may have reckoned was going to be more effective in curbing similar behavior in the future than scolding them for them not being ethical.
He pointedly avoids scolding them for not being ethical, and he gives them a very practical pointer. Consider all the other effects that may happen from your behavior. That's important to know now, but he's going to harbor his true feelings towards the merits of their behavior for 50 years.
You have dishonored me, your father, which would have made them feel pretty bad based on their love and respect for their father and his stature, and you've endangered all of us.
Yes.
And those are going to be more effective arguments for these two particular guys than what you did was unethical.
But he doesn't address the actual merits of their decision. He doesn't talk about whether they did right or wrong. That's not at all mentioned. He's like, well, take into account this, take into account that, take into account these other factors, even though secretly we discover later on that he actually completely disagrees with the underlying foundational decision that they made.
Now, they appear to get the last word here. Of course, 50 years later, he gets the last word, but they say, should our sister be treated like a whore? So even though their father is telling them, look, you disrespected me and you endangered us all, they still respond to him.
Yeah, and that shows us their perspective. That they're saying, listen, we cannot think about anything else besides this. This completely dominates our behavior. The fact that other people see it, the fact that my honor will become odious in the eyes of the onlookers and the baby danger, like they're not able to expand their aperture beyond this point.
Yeah, they're hyper-focused on this.
Yes.
From our perspective now, even what they say seems to be a little retrograde. Like, should our sister be treated like a whore, right? They're more worried about how their sister is treated than even like her safety. You know, if your sister is kidnapped and raped, that's horrible on so many levels. They seem to be focused on the reputation, the status.
I would harken back to what we mentioned earlier, that they were her brothers. They believed in the integrity and the honor and the prestige and the stature of this family. And if our sister's going to be touched like that, sorry, we just can't, we're not going to think about all the other things.
Yeah. So they're focused on this. This is their response to their father. In it, I read a little bit of sheepishness. You know, their father rebukes them and gives them good reasons why they shouldn't have done this. And they kind of have this weak response to him. I wonder if at that point, Yaakov was like, okay, you know, get out of here. Go back.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also understand the larger context. There was that snide line from Pinker that like, and then they sold their brother into slavery, right?
Yeah, right.
They did sell Joseph into slavery, and it's almost a similar sort of mistake. Joseph was speaking slanderously to their father. He was bringing all the sins of the brothers to the father. That's what the verse says, right? So therefore, there's again a violation of this family, of the integrity and the honor and the prestige and the stature of the family. And that prompts them to do something else, which, again, they didn't think about the knock-on effects. Mm-hmm. They didn't think about the consequences. They didn't think about what it would do to Jacob. So there is a certain pattern that we're sensing here with Shimon and Levi. And by the way, we know for sure Shimon and Levi were the ones who did it. There's a very easy calculation that shows clearly that Shimon and Levi were the ones who did it. Reuven tried to save him. He came back the next day to find the pit empty and he ripped his garments. Judah tried to save them. We can't kill him. What will we get from killing him? Yisachar and Zvulun are like the younger kids. Like they're not going to be the ones who take initiative in front of older brothers. The other children of Bilhah and Zilpah, they were the ones who were very friendly with Joseph, and Joseph was defending them. So it has to be a process of elimination. It has to be the Shimon and Levi the ones who sold them. And it's a similar sort of calculation that they do, where they're very narrowly focused on what does this do to our family? The fact that we have a brother here, a member of our family that's trying to disrupt the order and the balance and the well-being and the continuity of the family, and they behave in a way that maybe is inappropriate. Now, to take it even further, if you zoom out even further, at the end of the Torah, the second to last chapter in the Torah, it's Moshe on his deathbed. And he speaks not to the sons of Jacob, but to the tribes that they spawned. And he does not mention anything about the tribe of Shimon. Shimon is omitted, the only tribe that's not mentioned by Moshe. But what he tells Levi, it's very interesting. Because if you read it very carefully, he's telling Levi, you understood what Jacob wanted. You moderated, you changed. Because he praises Shimon and Levi for their behavior towards their family and their prioritization of God above their family. And he tells them, like, you told your family, to your father and to your brother and to your grandfather and to your child, you pushed them away. Here, they're like, oh, you made our sister's going to be a whore? Joseph is like causing problems in the family. So like when family kind of made them see things not clearly. And they made rash decisions. And the fact where they made a very clear decision in the aftermath of the golden calf, it's a whole story. But Moshe highlights the fact that they were able to see beyond the family and to make clear, level-headed decisions. That is the greatest praise, where they understood where they went wrong and they moderated and they rectified it. I will add, I mentioned earlier that the tribe of Levi, that is the tribe of the clergymen, right? Moshe comes from this family and Aaron comes from this family, and Moshe is a grandson of Levi. Levi's daughter is Yocheved, and that's Moshe's mother. So the most special people come from this family. And we're not whitewashing the mistakes of these legends. Like this is who we are. I think it's very noteworthy that we have our book our authoritative book, and so freely criticizing the mistakes of very, very special people. The most rebuked, criticized person in the Torah is Moshe. People don't realize that. After Moshe and Aaron, they hit the rock as opposed to speaking to it. God says to them, you don't believe in God, which is an outrageous thing to tell Moshe and Aaron. If they don't believe in God, who does? But there was something that he did wrong, and those mistakes are not ignored. I think that this story does serve as another example of the fact that, hey, we have the holy book of the Jews, and it's instructive, and the humans portrayed in it are not infallible, and they make mistakes, and we were shown their mistakes, and they're criticized for their mistakes, and the hope is that they improve as a result. We're not angels, we're humans, and clearly Jacob believed, whether or not he was right or wrong, but Jacob believed that they made a mistake. Both at the time he criticizes them, 50 years later he criticizes them. He's under the impression that they made a mistake.
It's the Torah is an honest portrayal of the human condition and human behavior, and the hard work is in understanding what our orientation should be to these stories. And I think that's what's lacking from Pinker's analysis, ultimately, is that it's taken at face value that if it's in the Torah, must be idealizing that behavior, right, when in fact it's not. And I think that the process we've just gone through shows how we are supposed to learn from the Torah and what messages and lessons we're supposed to take from it. And seeing Jacob's criticisms of his sons and how he handles them is as instructive in a way as the criticisms themselves. Maybe he knows Shimon and Levi well enough to know that a moral rebuke of them will not be effective, but a practical one will be more effective for these two types of guys, even though very shortly after they make a similar mistake. But, this leads to another aspect of Pinker's criticism or his commentary, which is that the God of the Torah has the moral code of the Corleones, which seemed to me one of his most far-fetched claims, in that why is he making the assumption that what God wants is blood revenge, or that God is idealizing this? And so what can we learn about what God's perspective is on their behavior? Is that just what the commentaries
I think the fact that the Torah, the fact that the Torah, the Torah authored by God, tells us this story and highlights the mistakes that they made, and certainly the criticism that Jacob gives them, both here and later on, that is an indication that there was something wrong with their decision-making and with their ignorance of other factors and with their employing violence. Yeah. So I think that's actually the exact opposite of what Pinker was trying to bring out, that if there was a mistake, well, the Torah itself spells it out for us to learn what not to do.
Which is act rashly, take justice into our own hands.
First of all, to go against Jacob, right? Jacob did not advocate for this. Like, why'd they go rogue? Whether or not Jacob had a different plan, but they clearly spell out their argument and their plan to Jacob. Why not? That's what they should have done. And Jacob would have said not to do it, as evident by the fact that he says this is not the way. So I think that that's the most basic criticism. And then again, Jacob himself highlights the fact that they're violent. Where's the violence come from? You have to maintain your equanimity even under very difficult and challenging times. There's a cool epilogue to this story. Do you know the epilogue to the story?
No, I do not.
Dina became pregnant from this interaction. And she actually had a daughter. She was the mother. Shechem, now deceased, is the father. And the Midrash tells us that the brothers of Jacob wanted to kill this baby. The brothers of Joseph, the children of Jacob. They thought, like, this is just the daughter of Shechem, that terrible villain that we killed. Let's kill the baby too. We don't want to have any remnant of this sordid affair. And Jacob said, no, you can't touch the baby. And he made an amulet that would protect her, and he sent her to Egypt. And she was adopted by Potiphar and his wife. and she actually married Joseph. That's the full epilogue to the story. That actually Joseph married the adopted daughter of Potiphar, who was actually biologically the daughter of Dina and Shechem.
Amazing. So
Now, what takes this even further, Joseph ends up with an extra plot of land. So if you recall, at the end of the Torah, before the deathbed scene of Jacob, in chapter, I think it's 48 of the Torah, of Genesis, open it here so I don't misquote it. Jacob tells Joseph, I'm going to give you the city of Shechem. So Joseph today, the burial spot of Joseph is in the city of Shechem.
wow.
The same city where this atrocity happened. Why did Joseph marry it? Because Joseph married the heir to Shechem. The only heir to the city of Shechem, the biological daughter of Shechem, was actually his wife. And thus his family tribe inherits that land.
So do we know who the descendants of Joseph and Shechem and Dina's daughters are?
Yes, we do know. We have Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph. Remember the ones that Jacob does the switcheroo with his hands?
Yeah.
Those are grandchildren of Shechem.
Were those
Yeah.
Joseph's only two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh?
That we know of. That we know. The Torah references other sons, and we don't know their names.
Amazing. And they were all with this girl, this daughter of Dina and Shechem. All of his children, or
Yes.
did he have other wives?
Certainly the two that we know of. We don't know of any other wives that he had.
That is an amazing epilogue. It's a real mixed bag.
Well, the nice thing about it is that Shechem ended up with a great legacy because of his, after he died, obviously, but his posthumous son-in-law is Joseph.
Yeah.
And his posthumous grandsons are Ephraim and Manasseh, and they became part of the great nation, the two tribes. So Joshua, Moshe's successor, is from the tribe of Ephraim. That means that Joshua was a descendant of Shechem. Yeah, he ended off pretty well with the bargain, if you think about when all is said and done.
In a way, he got what he wanted.
Yeah, he got part of this family, exactly.
Yeah. Amazing, Rabbi Wolbe. Thank you so much.
Did we survive our hugging the third rail?
Time will only tell. We'll see what the responses are, but this was better than I could have imagined or hoped for. And I just loved getting into the details of this and really exploring this difficult Bible story in the way that it was intended to be analyzed and understood. And I hope that this is the first of, it's actually not our first podcast together, but this is our first Third Rail Judaism podcast together of many.
Well, as I told you, I cannot wait to be invited back. And I hope the show takes off and you're able to dive into more of these knotty and controversial and difficult subjects. And again, we were not embarrassed of it. We're not embarrassed of it. It's part of the Torah. And it's not always easy to figure out what the lessons are, but that's what we're supposed to do. We're not going to shy away. We're not going to edit it out of our reading. We read it every single year. We read it. We don't omit it. We never skip anything. It's important for us to study it. And sometimes it's hard for us to figure out what the lessons are. We try to really use a fine-toothed comb to try to study it, to try to understand what the words actually say, and see the nuance, the subtleties, and of course all the commentaries, and hopefully emerge with valuable lessons and insights that are, like we said earlier, that Torah means instruction. They are instructive for us, and hopefully encourage us to live a more uplifting and moral life.
Thank you, Rabbi Wolbe.
Thank you for inviting me, and good luck with the podcast.
Thanks. Talk soon. Well, I think we have demonstrated that, contrary to Pinker's assertion, the Dina narrative is anything but a simple endorsement of violence and blood vengeance. This kind of nuanced, multi-layered interpretation is in sharp contrast to Pinker's blanket framing of the Old Testament violence as if it were endorsed by God, when in fact the text takes pains to show the ethical struggles, missteps, and deeply human frailty and imperfection, even among the most prominent figures in our history. We are all, after all, human beings, subject to the human condition. Thank you for listening, and if you had made it this far, let me compliment you on being a true Iron Man. I really hoped you enjoyed the episode, If so, please drop a rating and brief review. You can email me with any questions or feedback at thirdRailJudaism@gmail.com. That is third spelled out, not the number. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope you did as well. Thanks again, and until next time.